my world became decidedly different almost overnight. Um, it changed from being a relatively safe world to being a very unsure place. And I pretty much left, I lived at home with my mother, but I pretty much left home after that and went what we Australians say as overseas, which is to England.
Did it push you into adulthood and independence sooner?
Well, I wasn't a child. I was 19. No, I don't think it did that, but I certainly kind of took off running in some way. I mean, there was an urgency after that creatively that I didn't have before that, and I'm not really sure what that's to do with, but and a kind of rage about things.
He had been an English teacher. Was he an influence on you in terms of writing or the books that you read?
I mean, he was a massive influence. He was a smart guy and a very well read, and and I'd be sitting around at home and reading something or other, and he would say, I'd be reading a crime novel, let's say, and he'd say, well, look, if you really want to read a great murder scene, here, check this out, and he'd kind of read the murder scene in Crime and Punishment to me. Or, he read me the first chapter of Lolita, which had a huge impact over me. I mean, for many reasons. But not just in that he turned me on to a lot of great literature, but I kind of saw the effect that literature had on him, and kind of wanted some of that.
And your mother was a librarian. Did she choose books for you?
Well, not in the same way. But really, I'm even though my father was very much the flamboyant one, and the one the family would kind of crane towards when he would be talking at the dinner table, I'm very much like my mother, actually. Most of my ideals and stuff really come from my mother.
Did you read the Bible with either of your parents, since they knew a lot about books, and you talked about reading the Bible when you were young?
No, they weren't particularly religious.
I thought they might be into it, like, as literature.
No, I think after a while I started to look for things that my parents didn't know about, Mm-hmm. I became very competitive with my father, particularly as a teenager, and actively went out and kind of started to look at areas of literature that I knew that he that he didn't really know much about.
Like what?
Like French literature. I mean, I remember poring over Alfred Jarry and stuff like that, and going back to him and saying, "Hey, have you read Alfred Jarry?" And he going, "Well, no, I haven't," and I'm going, "Well, you should, Dad," So we became quite competitive later on, as we should.
We've talked a lot about your early life and your formative years. Tell us a little bit about what your life is like now. I know you're married. You have 2 children. You have a couple of children from earlier relationships.
Yeah, I have
too.
4 children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's my life like? I don't know. My life. I work a lot. I seem to have an enormous amount of projects on the go. All sorts of different things. And it's a very exciting time at the moment. I'm about to make another Grinderman record and go on a major tour with the Dig Lazarus Dig record by the Bad Seeds. I've got a couple of soundtracks pending, and I'm working on a new novel. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and it just feels like a good time in that respect.
Do you feel like when you were younger, you were into a kind of intentionally, like, transgressive image, and that as you've gotten older, that's just kind of changed, and the way you live life has changed?
Yeah, the way I live life has changed. I don't think I particularly had any kind of image. I was just the way that I was, and interested in the things that I was at that particular time. I don't feel that there's much of a logic to the kind of trajectory of my life. It's just gone the way it has, at the moment, it feels strong. It feels strong, and that's a really nice feeling to have, especially creatively.
You've just released a new record, but I would like to start, if you don't mind, with the previous one. So Grinderman, that's the one I'm talking about. The Grinderman record. You picked up the guitar. Well, how was that? How was that?
Oh, it was great.
The first moment. How long did it take you to learn the basics, for example?
Well, a month, something like that.
A month. And then you started.
It ain't rocket science.
And did your fingers hurt like it does with everybody who starts?
Well, you know, I can't play bar chords and stuff.
Okay.
I just play open chords. So.
Okay, and you started writing songs on the guitar.
Yeah, immediately, pretty much.
Okay, and how did the rest of the guys react when they saw you, you know, standing in the rehearsal room with the guitar around you?
Varying degrees of horror. But I mean, Warren, who I work with a lot on all sorts of stuff, Warren Ellis, he very much backed the idea. I mean, when we were going to do Grinderman, I said, well, who are we going to get to be the guitarist? And he said, you're the guitarist.
Yeah.
And I said, but I can't play the guitar. And he said, well, that's just a sort of technicality. Go and buy yourself one. We've got a month. Learn it and be the guitarist. And you know, and I needed someone to sort of tell me to do that, really. I don't think I would have had possibly the confidence to have just sort of done that on my own.
And then suddenly you have a new language, basically.
Well, you have the whole history of kind of rock and roll at your fingertips.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you know, I've always played the piano, and I've never been able to really understand rock and roll through the piano in a lot of ways. The chords don't naturally go in that way.
No, it's beautiful also.
Well, it's much easier to play in E flat and these sorts of, you know, these sorts of keys. It's actually just much more natural to do that. And suddenly you pick up the guitar and you just start playing your thing, and you just think, oh shit, that's why that song is like that. And suddenly all of this stuff opens up to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just sit there and pretty much off the bat, you can play, you know, the first Velvet Underground album.
So the last album, which is another great one, Dig Lazarus Dig. The first thing that struck me was the avalanche of words. It's really a word-horny record. It's like every word that you say, you're already thinking of the next one, and then you say, maybe I can squeeze this one in too. Yeah. Where does this love? Because that's what I think it is.
Where does that come from?
Where does it come from? Is it? Have you always been a reader?
Well, I've always been a reader, and I've always got a kick out of words, even from when I was really young. In fact, I remember the first time that I got this kind of thrill down my spine about when I came across a bunch of words, and I was really young. I remember being maybe 9 or something like that, and reading a Tarzan book, Edgar Rice Burroughs. And there was some line about the lion's tail moved spasmodically or something like that. And I remember going, oh, wow, and just getting this sort of thrill, you know, this real thrill about a bunch of words put together. They probably weren't even that good, but at the time I just thought, wow. I mean, I have a natural tendency to be expansive. I mean, all the songs that I write are usually twice as long as they end up on the record, and it's actually become a kind of writing device, in that I write, say, a 10-verse song. I write it, I spend a lot of time on these 10 verses and get them just right. Yeah. And then go into the studio, sit down and start playing the song, and the first question at the end of when we finished is, how long is the song? Yeah. Not how good is the song, but how long is the song? And someone will say, well, it's 6 minutes. And I'll say, right, it's too long. Yeah. And then bang out that verse, and that, with very little kind of thought to that. Just start editing very quickly on the spot. And what happens is you get this wonderful new kind of, the song takes on this whole mysterious element that you don't really even understand while you're recording it. Till later on you kind of listen to it and suddenly it's a different song. The lyrics kind of mean a different thing now that you've sort of edited them in some way. And Dig Lazarus Dig is a lot like that.
But you're sitting there and you go, okay, here's a great line, and then you want their reaction and they're not reacting at all.
No, I don't. I've long since given up any hope that anyone's...
But why is this?
I think that, you know, first of all, you've got to understand that when we go into a studio, we recorded Dig Lazarus Dig in 5 days. We booked 7 and we finished it in 5, and then the last 2 were just sort of sitting there going.
And you mixed it.
It took, I don't know, it took about 5 days to mix as
Okay,
well.
so that's 10 days in all. That's quick.
And no one's sitting around analysing anything. We're just going in and you play this, you play that, bang, bang, bang,
Yeah.
and they're down, and we kind of stand back from it. And so, no, I don't really think they give a shit.
I know bands that split up because of this.
Yeah. Well,
Does that not make you utterly paranoid?
No.
That you may be, presenting worldviews, and the people that are nearest to you don't agree at all.
well, I think that they're wise enough to be able to sort of stand back from that and say we're the musicians and our contribution is the music, and it's my band in the sense that it's ultimately my vision that's being put forward, and that they're not necessarily implicated in that.
You once said, "I'm not a social commentator. You rather write love songs." Did that ever frustrate you that you were never somebody that was really talking a lot about politics in songs? Did you ever consider that to be a weakness as a songwriter?
I've just never had that desire that I know some people have when they look around the world and they see some atrocity or some wrong going on. They feel, I've got to write a song about that. I'm just not inspired by those things in that way. It's not that I don't know about them or that I don't feel strongly about them. It just doesn't. I think that there's 2 different sorts of writers really. There's the ones that do that see the world and then sit down and write about it, and their writing is very much influenced by the way that they see the world. And there's other sorts of writers like myself which write first, and the way they see the world is very much influenced by that
But
process.
they seem to be disappeared. I think the people that really write about the world in the '60s, you had people that clearly were involved in this. Then you had rap music, which was basically at the start very socially.
Well, I think maybe in the '60s people believed that to write a song
Could change something.
and I don't think people believe that anymore. I don't think that people feel they have the power to influence the events of the world and stuff that the people felt they had in the '60s and stuff. And I think this is what this record is very much about. Ultimately, is that each song, within each song, and there's someone that everyone's kind of asleep or comatose or catatonic or apathetic or something like that. They're unable to actually have any effect over anything. The characters on this record, and I think that to me, and that's the kind of prevailing feeling that we have in this world, is that this kind of monstrous machinery keeps rolling on.
Yes.
And there's nothing we can really do to stop it.
You're talking about characters, which is something interesting, because you once said that Murder Ballads, the album, liberated you from writing about yourself. This album seems to be at times very autobiographical.
Yeah, it is.
But still, you talk about characters. So how does that zone work when you write a song? Where is the personal zone, and where's the zone where you start telling stories about people?
Well, the Murder Ballads record's obviously just a bunch of stories. They're not. I'm not in those stories. It's just a bunch of stories. But I think that there was the Boatman's Call that kind of I sort of wrote that record, which was highly personal, and kind of shrunk away from that kind of stuff. I mean, it's still like that in the next record. There's still a certain amount of that sort of stuff. But there was something about it that creeped me out, and that I didn't really kind of...
Right, you thought you went too far?
Well, it felt very kind of... that it was sort of ego-massaging, masturbatory kind of stuff, like, look at my life, and... I'm the kind of hero of these great tragedies that are happening to me, and all this sort of stuff, and that kind of...
But that's the paradox, isn't it? Because the more personal you get, the more you tend to, touch people.